Thank you. Have you ever felt trapped in a toxic relationship? One that seemed to be both constantly physically and emotionally draining? One that feels like you have control and gives you that false sense of security, but quickly becomes all-consuming and destructive? Well, that, my friends, is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to eating disorders. Much like a manipulative partner, they seem to promise comfort and solutions to our insecurities, but over time are more demanding and harder to escape. This week is the annual observance of Neda, otherwise known as National Eating Disorder Awareness Week. Now, many people don't really know about eating disorders, and I myself was one of them until it happened to me. In December of 2012, I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa, and 2 weeks later, I was rushed across the country to a eating disorder clinic in Baltimore. For me, I was at a point in my life where everything seemed to just be crumbling, and I was having a hard time with a breakup, military life, and on top of that, I was going through a really difficult time with my family. Now, looking back, I felt powerless, and anorexia was my way of gaining control. Now, before I get wrapped up in my story, let me explain a little bit more about eating disorders themselves and the numerous different types. So, 1 in 10 people will have an eating disorder in their lifetime, which makes sense with the room, 110. Every 52 minutes, one person dies. That means by the time our meeting will have ended, another person will have died. Food insecurity is associated with 1.6 higher odds of binge eating disorder, otherwise known as BED, in early adolescence. Less than 6% of people with an eating disorder are clinically underweight, which I know when I first knew about eating disorders, you think of the common ones that you might hear about sometimes, anorexia or bulimia. And suicide is one of the leading causes of death in those diagnosed with eating disorders. This next fact kind of shocked me. 1 out of 20 women who are pregnant are at risk of an eating disorder during their pregnancy. And this is actually something that I did see at the eating disorder clinic. And it's hard to understand, but as a woman, when you're just gaining weight, even though you're pregnant, you don't always think about that in your mind at the time, that you're carrying a child and that you're supposed to gain weight. And one study found that nearly half of eating disorder patients admitted to a residential facility in the US had symptoms compatible with PTSD or some sort of trauma in their life. Now, when you think of eating disorders, what do you think of? Maybe it's anorexia, also known as anorexia nervosa, which is characterized by a dramatic weight loss and simply just not eating. Or another eating disorder you may have heard of is bulimia nervosa, or simply put, bulimia. And bulimia is where a person will force themselves to vomit after eating large amounts of food usually. Now, there are also other types of eating disorders as well. Purge restriction disorder, PICA, which if you don't know what that is, that's where you eat random things like dirt, grass, toilet paper, just random things that you find around the house, and it is an actual eating disorder. Avoidant food intake disorder, which shockingly is more common than you would think. Some people won't eat certain things, or they will only eat certain things or certain amounts of food. And then there's endos, eating disorders not otherwise specified, which a lot of people are categorized in this because they'll have like a mix of a few of them. Now that we know a little bit more about eating disorders, let's go into some of the myths versus the facts, because this is kind of a big thing, and there's lots of stigmas in the eating disorder communities. Myth: eating disorders are not a serious illness, when in fact eating disorders are very serious, and actually, anorexia nervosa has the highest mortality rate besides opioid addiction. Myth: eating disorders are just about food. Fact: eating disorders are not about food. They're often an attempt to control something in someone's life. Like I said before, for me, it was about getting control, even though at the end of the day, I was not the one in control. Myth: eating disorders are a female illness, when in fact, eating disorders are unbiased. They will do any kind of disorder to male, female, any age, it does not matter. And while it's more typical that you see women with eating disorders, about 25% of all eating disorders are associated with men. Myth: eating disorders don't develop until teen years. Fact: people with eating disorders, it can happen at any age. And this was something that I really struggled with when I was in Baltimore. There was a 6-year-old girl, and she was, just beautiful. And she was having a hard time struggling with anorexia and bulimia, and I watched it, and it's just heartbreaking when you see someone of that age. Myth: only very thin people have eating disorders, when in fact, any body weight can have an eating disorder. Myth: eating disorders are caused by the media and or parents. Now this of course goes by case scenario, and everyone's a little different, but it can cause a little bit of effect from the parents or media, but that's not the actual cause. Myth: recovery from eating disorders are rare, when in fact you can recover. It's tough, but you can. And I think some of you may have noticed, it's very small, I have this tattoo on my finger, and it's actually the eating disorder recovery symbol. And I put it on this finger because it's my ring finger, and it feels like I'm almost married to the disorder. And like a marriage, you go through ups and downs, goods and bads, but at the end of the day, I think life is worth fighting for, so we should always continue the fight. Thank you.